Welcome to the No BS Short-Term Rental Podcast, an unfiltered look into the global vacation and short-term rental industry.
I'm Mateo Bradford.
And I'm John Stokinger.
And this is our podcast. We bring the right people to the table at the right time, giving you an inside view and take on the short-term rental industry like no other podcast can.
Good morning, Mateo. How are you?
Good, brother. How are you?
I am great. I'm glad to see you back in ATL. I'm glad you made it back safe and sound. Season 2, episode 23. We have an exciting guest today, a newer spin on how we normally take things. And I'm super excited to learn about her business and what she's offering to her clientele and her listeners. She's kind of almost a Swiss Army knife of offerings to investors, and I'm excited to chat about it and to learn a lot and this is definitely a different direction for us. So I'm excited for our audience. Let's go ahead and introduce Avery Carl, the CEO of the Shortterm Shop. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Avery.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile here, and there's a gazillions of things to, of all that, going down from, if we go back, 10 years and different things, you're a sales account executive, you're a set customer working with different marketing aspects and some web presence for different firms. And it's exciting to see, your journey, to where you are today. And just a quick blurb. We are talking with one of Wall Street Journal's top 100 agents in 2020. So we are in good company. Yay. Again, we need to go ahead and get one of those buttons, one of those cheesy buttons with the applause.
Applause.
We're not going to
let you.
No.
Yeah, I know that.
But we'll let Avery introduce herself and tell us who she is and where she is. I'd love to hear a little bit about who you are now, like where you are, but then let's talk about how you got there. Okay. And then we can come back to what you're doing. So who is Avery Carl and what is the Shortterm Shop?
Okay. So I am a real estate investor first. I own just under 200 doors, and I went from 0 to 200 over the course of about 5.5 years because 5 of my first 6 properties were short-term rentals. And because they cash flow so much heavier than traditional long-terms, I was able to scale much more quickly than if I just stuck with traditional long-terms. I have a podcast called The Shortterm Show, also an Amazon bestseller in 4 categories called Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth. That basically is kind of a guidebook for how I was able to do that so that other people can do it too. And then probably on our second short-term rental property deal, we kind of realized there weren't really any agents in the space who could even answer our questions about like, hey, how do I find a cleaner? How much should this property make? So I bridged that gap, got my license, and became that agent, opened our first short-term shop office in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. And we are now in 11 markets in 7 states.
What's that trajectory? Like, what's that time frame? 11 markets, 7 states.
5 years.
5 years, 200 doors. That's impressive.
Thank you.
We were talking earlier about what you're talking to when you're talking to these investors, who is your investor? Like, who is your target demographic? Who are you? Is it just someone that has is looking for their first vacation rental home or their first investment property, or is it someone that is building a portfolio and they want to go ahead and add more?
It's a little bit of everybody, but I would say mostly our clientele are people who are either brand new to investing or people who have a few long-term doors who want to scale their portfolio, but need like a little bit of a turbocharger to do that. So I would say as like a one general demographic, it's people who want to get out of the corporate world by scaling their real estate portfolio, which we can get into that too, because, I've done a lot of things and I don't think anybody says, hey, I want to be in real estate when I grow up. So, I had a few phases before I got here. But that's generally people who are exactly like I was, who wanted to get out of their corporate gig or grow their portfolio faster so they have that freedom.
Right. I think we talk about this a lot on the podcast. It's like everyone kind of stumbles into this space. Like, and even on the podcasting, like, at I know at Mateo and my age, we're like who grew up and said, I want to be a podcaster wasn't even a thing. It wasn't, so it's kind of interesting to see where this is going. Tell me about you've 11 markets, you're in 5 states, you're helping these people, but how do you, like you said, your guests don't necessarily they kind of stumble into your clients, they stumble into this, but how did you come into this position of where you are today? Prior than 5 years ago, what was the direction? How did you stumble in?
Yeah. So I graduated from undergrad in the worst time in the history of probably the entire history of America to graduate college with a communications degree. I graduated in spring 2009 from University of Texas in Austin. And I've always played music, always been a guitar player. And at the time I played in bands all through college, toured all over the place. I don't know really how I made that work with college, but I did it. And when I graduated, it was like, all right, cool. There's not any jobs. So I guess I'm going to keep, just doing this music thing. I have an excuse now. It's not like, a failure to launch here. I can't launch because there's no job. So toured in bands, worked in the bar business to supplement that income because there is none. And, got to do a lot of cool things, toured Europe a few times, toured Japan, did all kinds of stuff. I lived in Austin.
Wait, time out.
Yeah.
So you toured Europe, what is the band? What was the predominant band name? So we can go ahead and then search you up on Spotify and
oh gosh, a bunch of little crappy punk bands that nobody's ever heard of.
Probably not, but I still need to listen. You know what? You're not going to give it.
So I was in one all-girl punk band called the Applicators. Then I played bass for a rockabilly legend named Danny B. Harvey, and then also played bass for a guy named Ivan Julian, who he was in, if you're into classic punk, he was the guitar player for Richard Hell and the Voidoids in the 70s, and then a bunch of other cool stuff after that. He's been on a couple Clash records, things like that. So I played with him too. But those are like the 3 main ones.
That's awesome.
So hold up. No, just stop. She used the phrase, I have no idea what it is, but I'm completely want to know. Rockabilly?
Rockabilly.
You know what rockabilly is? The big pump door?
Yeah. Okay. So rockabilly is kind of like, the best way to describe it is like people now that are playing like classic, like 50s rock and roll. So if Elvis came out now, he would probably be considered rockabilly. I know that's going to sound sacrilegious to a lot of people, but like the Stray Cats, that was like the second wave.
That's where I was going. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was going with the Stray Cats.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It's those guys who were like super 50s.
Yeah.
That's how I would describe it.
See, I'm a big music
rolled
guy.
Up t-shirts with the cigarettes there.
Yes, exactly.
We're there. I just had to, it struck out. I wasn't sure what that was. I wanted to check in.
Yeah.
I never really got into the punk scene. The earliest kind of like alt punk that I was a huge Pixies fan. So not necessarily punk by any means, but it was kind of that transition out of there in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s. But sorry,
post punk. Yeah, I like it all. I love it all.
I'm a big Black Francis fan.
Sweet.
So, all right. Sorry. Back to we paused. We digress.
Incredible
now
journey.
back to your story. This is
in
like
college.
I'm super.
She's been around the world. So.
Yeah. So did that, lived in LA for a little while, lived in New York for a little while. When I lived in New York until about 2012. Around that time, it was like, okay, I think, I'm tired of this. I can't bartend forever and play music forever, as fun as it is. It's time let's go back to school and get a master's degree. Met my husband when I lived in New York. And so we were kind of looking for a change anyway. And so we moved to Nashville, and I was working on getting my master's at Belmont. And so we bought a house because, it's really difficult to buy a house in New York City. But at the time when we bought in Nashville, it was still super cheap. So we were like, oh, cool, we can buy a house. So we were looking for a house, and our real estate agent at the time, I wasn't licensed yet or interested. She was really trying to get us to buy in this area called East Nashville that was like super fast appreciating and super hip and, all that stuff. And she was like, yeah, people are making like $100,000 in a year on their house. Little did we know what would happen in 2020 through 2022. But back then that was a lot of money. And we're like, no, we're coming from Brooklyn. We're sick of neighbors. We moving to Tennessee. Like, we want to buy something out in the country. So we did that. And then we thought about it. I'm like, man, we have a little bit of money left. Like maybe there's something to that, buying that house in the hipster area and renting it out. And then maybe one day when we have kids, it will have appreciated enough that we can pay for their college instead of having to pay for it out of pocket. We can just sell this house. We'll be like the smartest people ever. We are such geniuses. And so we did it. We went and bought a house there without knowing anything about real estate investing. Didn't even know it was called real estate investing. We just did it. Thank God it ended up being a really good one. And we were cash flowing. So we paid 120 for it. Mortgage was about 650. We were able to rent it out for 1550. So almost $1,000 a month, like pretty good for a long term.
Is it still in your portfolio?
No, I 1031 exchanged it recently. Yeah. So, when we got that first rent check, we were like, okay, we're onto something here. We need more of these things. How can we get more? And we only had like enough of a down payment left for one single family. We couldn't go out and like buy a big multi or anything. So we thought, well, what can we buy that we can make the most amount of money the fastest so we go buy more of these things? So we landed on short-term rentals. Didn't really want to do it in Nashville because all the anti-short-term rental stuff was kind of starting to bubble up at that time. And we're like, we can't afford to buy something and then them tell us we can't use it for what we need to. So we just gone on vacation to the Smoky Mountains, which is about 3 hours east. And we said, well, everybody stays in short-term rentals there. Everybody goes there to stay in a cabin. Somebody owns those cabins. Why not us? So we started looking.
We talk about this a lot, but this is exactly where Mateo and I met in Gatlinburg, where we have a love. We kind of love the Pigeon Forge Gatlinburg market. There's a lot of stories that go back to there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I've got 5 there. But that was where we bought our first one. And, we could not afford. So at the time, how we got into the self-management thing, at the time, the standard for any of the property management companies out there was 40% of your gross. And we were like, well, that is not going to work for us. So we were like, we can do this from Nashville. We know we can. So we kind of figured it out. There weren't all the cool property management tools and automations that there are now back then. So we kind of had to do everything manually. But we figured it out. We were able to do it and keep, most of our cash flow. It scaled that from 1 to 5 cabins in the Smokies over the course of the next year and a half. And the rest is kind of history.
It's interesting. Like the Smoky Mountains in, that whole Sevier County is such a tight knit community. And, if one's doing 35, one's doing 40%, like it doesn't, like these property management companies, like if one's doing it, all of them are doing it because they figure they can go in, and it gives you, and I love this spin on it, because we always, I'd say 95% of our conversations are with professionally managed. And I'm not saying that, they're, with a property management company, all this stuff. I'm not saying anything negative about, self-managing. But it's interesting to see that, you went ahead and looked at it. And it's like, shit, this is, there's a lot of money we're leaving on the table here. Now there's pros and cons to that. Do you see there wasn't a lot of tech, or at least at your end, adopting at that time, you're doing a lot of things manual. Was there like, oh man, we really like, we're in over our heads, or was it like, oh, this is totally manageable at 5 units,
It was totally manageable. There were some things that I would say were super annoying that now are not as annoying, like mainly scheduling cleaners for 5 properties was really annoying, because at the beginning of every month I had to sit down, go through all 5 calendars, send it to our cleaner, send it to her 2 or 3 different ways. So there was no possible way she could screw it up. And now, that's automated. So having to start from totals. And at the time, it was absolutely worth my time, because I learned pretty quickly, like during that time of the scaling, I was working corporate jobs, and I learned really quickly after grad school that I'm not a good employee. Like I'm really good at working in the morning. So I get all my stuff done before like 10:30. And then I'm like, so I have to sit here until 5, and like, then what? But I was only making I was working on the management side of music, and I was only making like $40,000 a year, not even. So it was totally worth my time to do all this. But now, it's like a cakewalk compared to what it used to be with all the automations. So there was never a time that I really felt like I was over my head or in over my head. It was just like, okay, well, what am I going to do if a toilet breaks in Sevierville? I'm going to do the exact same thing as if a toilet breaks right here behind me. I'm going to call somebody, because I don't fix toilets. I don't know how to do that here. I don't know how to do that there. So it's a phone call either way. Just a mindset thing.
Right. It's interesting. Were you going to say something, Mateo? I thought you were going to jump in there. I saw you had like this. If those that aren't watching the video, he had this like poise, like you were going to say something. No,
I was going to dig into the numbers and just, but I didn't want to cut off the story. So with 200 doors, there's managers that don't have 200 doors.
These are not all short terms. I have eight of them are short terms. The rest of them are long terms.
Oh, okay.
And the long terms are absolutely with property. People are always like, isn't it a lot harder to manage short term than long term? For me, it's opposite, because long term, like, you're having to do credit checks. You have to let them in and look at things first. You have to do like all this stuff. You have to track down the rent every month that people don't necessarily want to offer up. So those are all with managers, but we still do self-manage our 8 short terms. And we do have a VA who helps us with that now.
Got you. Okay. All right. That's some questions.
No, yeah, not 200 short terms.
And be like, oh, there's a secret here I need to know. But no, I think it's interesting too. And I think there's definitely validity in the narrative that you have of, long-term management has its quirks as well. You got to deal with evicting people. I was actually with someone that manages long-term properties last week, and he was going around still collecting cash.
It sounds horrible.
I was like, what? Like, what are you doing? He's like, I got to go collect. He's got a couple duplexes, and he's like, I got to go collect this rent. And comes back in the car. He's got cash in his hands. I was like, okay, I guess that still works. But yeah,
I couldn't imagine. So you've made it up. You're doing this thing. You've got 5 units in Sevier County. You're up to, you're in 11 different markets on, helping people invest in STRs. Like what is, if I am, Joe, I'm looking to go ahead and get into investing. I want to go ahead and I have a home. I'm looking at, getting an STR, or looking just to go ahead and make some money, maybe not necessarily something I want to use at all, but what are the key things that you look for in acquiring short-term rental properties, and what are you teaching what do you talk about, with when you're asking their questions and what they're looking for?
So for me, the market is everything. So while I was living in Nashville, I was also selling short-term rentals in Nashville, and Nashville really solidified for me that I have no interest in investing in short terms in metro markets. I know a lot of people are making a killing on them, and that's totally cool. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but I was just always having to be so involved with going to the city council meetings and listening to why they're trying to ban it this time, or they're not banning it, but they're going to change this zoning to where these 20 investors now can't make money on their properties. And that's just not something that I want to deal with. So I try to stick to mature vacation rental markets. So like the Smokies, or Destin, Florida, or Santa Rosa Beach, like Panama City down here where I live, because these are all areas that people have been staying in short-term rentals forever and ever. It's not a new thing as of the past 15 years, like it is in a lot of the bigger metro areas. Like Destin had vacation rentals before it had electricity. And so the cities and counties, so the cities and counties figured out how to monetize that decades ago in those types of markets. So now, since there's very little hotel presence too, and they figured that out a long time ago, they're making so much money off that local occupancy tax of the short-term rentals that it would just be way too detrimental for the local economies to ever regulate very hard against them. So that's why I try to stick to those mature vacation rental markets like that rather than metro. So that's, the types of markets that we're in. And then in terms of the property, it just kind of depends on what their personal goals are in terms of price range and size. But the main thing is, aside from making sure that you're in the right area, and that like, I see people, for example, in the beach markets all the time that are like, want to buy something north of the bay because it's cheaper. And I'm like, that's not going to work, because people aren't going to rent that and drive 20 minutes to the beach. Yeah, it's really cheap. And when you're looking at all these data tools, it looks like it's going to be great, but people aren't going to rent it. So the biggest thing is you want to make sure that you're buying something that is what the tourists have come to expect of the market. So like the brick ranch home is what I always pick on. So if you buy a brick ranch home in the Smoky Mountains, it's not going to work because people come to the Smokies to stay in cabins. Same thing in beach markets. You know, they're looking for beach houses, whether they're like bright colors or like white is the new beach house color, or condos. Like they're not looking for this house that looks like it could live next door to them in wherever they live. It has to feel like part of the vacation experience. So that's the biggest thing.
It needs to be a destination, and you think about it, like I know when I go on vacation with my family, obviously we stay in short-term rentals. We always have, and it's the industry we live in, but we want to go and we want to upgrade. We want to go to something that's a different, we got a nice house here, right? But I want to go to the beach and have have these beach amenities, and I want to have these pools or what all these different things, and that makes a lot of sense when looking for an STR to get something that you can actually get your future guests are going to actually get some and it's going to drive an ROI. Speaking of ROI, like what is a good return on investment? Like these STRs are you're seeing, and depending on the market, they're millions of dollars, depending on the market. Yes, 500,000 up, you're going to go ahead and get something you can go in and fix up. What are you trying to go ahead and get back annually out of your investment for something like that?
So you're looking for a minimum of 20% cash on cash return. And that's the thing that I tell people about STR is like, it is so easy to analyze an apartment building because the rent is the rent, no matter what, for the next however long the lease is. And it fits really nicely into a spreadsheet, and it doesn't matter who manages it. But with short term, it's always going to be a little bit of a range because no matter how nice the property is, it's only as good as the manager that's managing it. So depending on the management, it will depend, that's going to determine how well the property does. But anyway, that's another story. But you're looking for a minimum of I would say 2 years ago, 20% was like the bare minimum. Now I would say like 15% is what you're looking for. But then you can, do some upgrades. Like I got one last year that was a 3-bedroom, but it had a partially finished storage room that wasn't even like advertised as being part of the square footage. And so we had it was super cheap to just put some nice flooring and some good drywall in and paint it. And now it's a 4-bedroom. So I would say 15% on a potential value add, and then 20 on just like a turnkey.
Have you noticed a change with, we talk a lot about, we all know that the vacation rental market has been here and the STR market has been here forever, right? Mm-hmm. But the world, and since COVID and since, everything shut down, has really been opened up to, since Airbnb, first of all, but then it's transitioned to where we are today. Have you noticed that like there's more and more investment money coming into the space from big names and big corporate investors and VC and stuff like that now makes it harder for you to go ahead and compete for specific STR, like specific properties you're looking at?
So I'm not seeing that in our markets yet, though I know it's coming. So most of the fund money is sticking to metro markets at the moment, but I think it's only a matter of time until they get into our markets for sure.
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing it, the sneaking in. When you say your markets, again, just kind of reiterate, you're in Sevier County, you're in Florida, the Gulf Coast of Florida. You said you're in 11 markets. What are some of the other markets you're in?
Okay, so I can only remember them all if I list them all in a specific order. So I'm just going to do that. Smokies in Tennessee, Blue Ridge, Georgia, Gulf Shores, Alabama, Galveston / Crystal Beach, Texas, Broken Bow, Oklahoma. We're in 3 markets of Florida. So the Emerald Coast and the Forgotten Coast, which are both on the Panhandle Gulf Coast. Yeah. And then we're also in the Disney market in Orlando, which isn't technically like a true vacation rental market. I'd call that a hybrid market. It's like its own thing. There's no other market like that. And then we're in 3 in North Carolina. So we're in the High Country, which is like the Banner Elk, Boone, Blowing Rock area, the Outer Banks. And then we call the last one our Carolina Beach Market, but it basically is all the other beach markets in North Carolina that are not part of the Outer Banks.
So like south of the Outer Banks from like Emerald down to the Curie and that whole. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. You got a little bit of spin. Do you have growth plans? Or are you?
We've got a few agents and a few other markets that we're looking to bring on. We're kind of like, seeing what happens with the market right now with the interest rates, because a lot of buyers, because we do a lot of sellers, but mostly buyers, because we teach them how to manage. So they're like, oh, well, look, let me get in on that. I think we're in like everybody's walking through the woods, and then somebody steps on a stick and everybody like stops and looks and waits to see what happens. I think that's kind of where we are with the interest rates right now, because they've gotten higher, but they're not really much higher than they were 3 years ago before they like dropped down in the toilet. So I think everybody is just like, oh, wait a minute, what's everybody going to do? And then I think it's going to pick back up. So we're kind of waiting to see what the market does before we bring on any new markets, just to kind of see what's up with it.
Do you think that give us your crystal ball prediction? What do you think the market's going to do? Do you think it's going to stay, or do you think it's going to rise, or do you think it will drop back down to something a little more, I wouldn't say reasonable, but you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously not toilet level, like, while you use your term, but
yeah, so it's hard to say. So I think the inflation piece is really what hangs me up, because I am by no means an economist. I made a C in macroeconomics at UT. So that's about the extent of my knowledge on economics. But here's what I think. I think that the numbers still make sense in a lot of cases. I mean, it's not like 5 years ago where you could go in the Smokies and buy something and get 100% cash on cash return. That's an absurd number. That is not an attainable number. So yeah, it's less now. It's not what it was, but I think that there are still deals out there that make sense. I do think that the interest rates are slowing down the markets a little bit. And what I mean by slowing down is like, it's not 50 offers on every single property anymore, but things are still maybe getting 2 or 3 and still going and asking. It's not like everything's going 100,000 over, which is good. That's ridiculous. That's not a sustainable pace. So I think it's slowing down a little bit. I think it might dip some, but I don't know how much higher inflation will take us before that dip happens. So it could take us another 10% higher. And then if it only dips 5, well, it's still more than it is today. So it's like there's so many arguments for both sides of that coin that it's just kind of hard to say.
That's a great take on it, because I have no idea. I know we're looking at purchasing a property as well right now. And we're like, I wish we could have done it 6 months ago. I wish we could have done it a year ago. So I know it's put a pause on us a little bit, not necessarily on, no, we're not going to, but having to think a little bit deeper on it if it makes fiscal sense right now.
Which is good. I think investors need to I've seen a lot of people just throwing money at everything, and just everybody calm down, do your analysis, make sure it works. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
I think but it does bring up the point of things that are I guess, prohibitive from getting people into the space broadly, right? One of the things we talk about openly on this show is just, the cost of entry into this industry is not cheap.
Right. And,
the amount of people, economy's been going good, things are going good, but housing prices, which you see from both sides, on the long-term side and the short-term side, it's very challenging for middle-class families to participate in investing. Yeah. So do you think about that in your model? I know that may not be your clientele, those in the markets that you're in, but do you think about that broadly in terms of, how does an industry flourish if it's only available to a small margin of people within that space?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult thing to think about. So I know for me, our short terms are significantly more expensive than our long terms. Like one short term door is like 12 long term doors in the equivalent price. So it's definitely a cost prohibitive industry, and it's definitely something that I know here in Santa Rosa Beach, a lot of the tourism workers, bartenders, restaurant workers, they have to live across the bay and drive in. Yeah. So it's definitely cost prohibitive, and it's something that I think is still attainable for a lot of people if you get into the right market. So for example, the Smokies are always going to be really solid numbers, but it's a very expensive market to get into. So one market that I'm kind of got my eye on for getting under our portfolio is Myrtle Beach because the purchase prices are significantly cheaper. So it makes it more available to more people to be able to get in there. And then I also have a mortgage company so Myrtle Beach is, and now we're getting like way into the weeds here. Myrtle Beach is mostly non-warrantable condos that are affordable. So if, as you guys know, non-warrantable condos, you have to get commercial financing, has to be 20, 25%, higher down payment. So on the mortgage company side, as we're trying to find, as we're trying to maybe expand into Myrtle Beach, we're also trying to find loan products that from portfolio lenders who they might want to finance our clients for lower than that so that we can get some of those people into that investment that, might be unattainable for them at the moment in other markets. So all that to say, it's just a matter of switching markets to try and figure out where, if you're priced out of one, getting into something else and still being able to get into the investing game. But in terms of like where in metro markets where people actually live, that fund money is a significant problem. So that property that I was talking about earlier, that first one that I bought that I 1031 exchanged. So I listed it myself on the MLS and I purposely priced it really, really high just to like see what it would do. I had no offers for the first 2 weeks. The only offer I got was from a fund for $40,000 over asking, cash, no inspection. And there was no reason they had to go that high. So they artificially drove the market up higher for those primary home buyers because they didn't even ask. It had been on the market for weeks. So there was no reason for it to have to go that high. So that's certainly an issue.
And that's where the backlash comes in, right? Because the reverberating effects of that and them driving that price up, affects markets. And it seems like it's not just an urban problem anymore either, right? Like it's happening in these traditional vacation destinations as well, to the point you just made. Like where do the staff and other people live, right? They're out of that. And I think we're even seeing kind of some regulatory issues in spaces we haven't had regulatory concerns before as a part of that. And I think you spoke to that, right? And one of the issues you said you don't want to be in the metro markets is you don't want to have to be consistently advocating and fighting for something that, is part of a bigger issue. And, it's going to be continuing conversation and, that affects the investments and the ecosystem around it. So
it does. Absolutely.
I mean, even, I know your market well where you live, in talking, PCB, like no worker, I'd say 75% of the workers in the PCB market live in Panama City. They live, they don't actually live in PCB. And so it's, just more fuel for those that want to come in and have an issue with STRs and vacation destinations and how are they going to go ahead and fight it? They're going to use these stats against the market and against what we're trying to do here. And it just makes it difficult. But
you got to find the balance. Is a problem, right? Because at the end of the day, you think about what we're talking about. The people who are working, right? If, in these spaces live somewhere else. But if those opportunities to work go somewhere else, then they're still not going to be able to live there. Like they're not going to have a job there. So I don't want to oversimplify it or let the pendulum swing to one side or the other. But I do think it brings up an interesting conversation that I think that we have to have about what our communities are going to look like and not just in urban areas, right? And, what do vacation rental destinations look like, right? It's the same thing like we see in Europe, right? People who live in Venice and people who live in these other places like that the world wants to come to and see that, have traditionally been people's homes and people want to live there. But there's way more people that are actually trying to come and see that. And, depending on how you look at it, it's a good or a bad thing because it's not like those people are just coming to look at a free museum, right? These people
they're spending money.
They're spending
money.
They're
boosting the economy's
right?
getting.
And so there is a balance, but I think, it's kind of a global conversation that communities are going to have around and have it realistically, and cut our show, cut the bullshit, like really what matters, what's important. Right. And I think if we work to find balance, we can. And we know we can ruin economies. We see that all the time. So,
right.
But yeah, I digress. So that's
to expand, while you just digress, but I'm gonna expand just briefly. I like that, Avery, you said, I didn't want to deal with that in the urban markets. It was too much. So we decided not focus on that. And we talk a lot about the importance of those that are working in these or have STRs in these, in these municipalities where there are a ton of regulations, the importance of, or maybe there aren't regulations today, but there's going to be in the future because it's a vacation destination, the importance of getting involved in your community early and making yourself known as a thought leader, as someone that, the municipality can reach out to you as a leader in the STR space. You realized early that wasn't a strong suit, and or maybe you're fine with it, but you didn't want to deal with it. But if you are in those markets, it's super important to get involved early, to A, be aware of what's going on, and B, to fight the good fight, and to kind of, to put balance to where is, seems to be a very one-sided because of regulations and deep pockets of those that are against the STR. Let's talk about your podcast, because you got a pretty legit setup there, and we know that you have the short-term shop, but you also have the short-term show. I'd love to hear about the podcast and your findings. We know our journey, and we've been doing this now a little over a year. It's been exciting. We've seen some pretty amazing growth. But tell us about your show.
Yeah. So it's called the Shortterm Show, like you mentioned, and we interview owners, we interview people who own businesses around the space, like furnishing businesses, data companies, banks. We have a really interesting interview with Relay Financial, which is really cool. It's like an online bank that does everything you need it to do. That every time dealing with Bank of America or whatever, I'm like, oh, if it would just do this, my life would be so much easier, but it didn't. So any owner or just person in the space who I think our listeners could benefit from hearing their story or learning, people who think that it's not possible for them, learning that it is, and it can be. You can build generational wealth through real estate investing, whether it's short-term or long-term, and that there's no one right way to do it. I focus on vacation rental markets, like we've already talked about, but I have plenty of clients who are crushing it in things that I would never do, but it's not wrong. They're crushing it. They're doing a great job, a medium term, corporate rentals in Chicago. That's not something I ever would have thought about doing, but I have clients who are absolutely crushing it. So I just think it's really important to hear other people's stories and their different ways of doing things, and learning that oh yeah, there's lots of ways to be successful in real estate. And that's what's cool about it.
That's cool. And so how long you've been doing it?
A little over a year also. So about the same as you guys.
Nice. Are you putting out? We'll go ahead and put a link to the show in our show notes. So how often does the podcast come out, and how long? Just so in case anyone wants to listen, that's on our audience.
Yeah, sure. So we are out every Thursday, and it's anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour. I try to keep it, unless it's a really, really interesting conversation, I try to keep it to 30 to 45 minutes so people don't feel locked in for an hour, but anywhere between 30 and an hour usually. Awesome.
So you're competing against us, probably crushing against us. So that's all right. We put out on Thursday as well. So sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. John, I was saying, and Avery, at what point did you realize, a year ago that, this was the right step for you? You've written a book, you're seeing that, media podcasts and things like that. Obviously, you have so much to offer people, and people seem to be really receptive to what you're doing. What made you take that loop? And take that road, because not everybody does that, and this is hard. John and I wanted to do this, but we love it. It's our, we talk about our love of doing this, and we know what our pivotal point was. We talked about it for a while, and it's then eventually I think, when things slowed down with COVID, it was the perfect opportunity to do it. But for you, we'd love to hear your story of what was your aha moment of yeah, we need to share this with the world.
Yeah. So for me, we have so many clients or just people who would reach out to me and ask I would get repeating questions. And I'd say, oh yeah, I know somebody who does that. Let me connect you with this person. Let me connect you with them. Let me listen to this person's story. And so eventually I was like, or I could just start a podcast. So I'm not having to like do all this all the
Right.
time. I can get upstream of this and then say, oh yeah, that's episode, whatever the podcast. And then I can share it with everybody at once instead of answering the same questions over and over again. I can say, oh yeah, go listen to Karan's podcast. You know, he talks about doing the medium term insurance rentals. Check that out. It's episode, whatever. So really just being able to help more than one person at a time, because I am only one person and I can't get to everything. I miss stuff. I'm human. So if it's out there for the world, then, you know, everybody can get the information that they need much more quickly.
That's a great answer.
Very cool. Yeah.
I think the main reason we just wanted to talk to people, like we love for us, it started at, you know, the travel circuit, going around for the different shows, the trade shows, and we're just, you know, bullshitting at the bar, talking about the, you know, everything. And then we saw a void in real conversations, or like, you know, the ability to go ahead and talk like a little deeper about things that we saw. And it's opened up a ton of doors. I think it truly has made a difference in both of our lives. And we look forward to this every week. I mean, this is like a highlight of it. We both have, you know, this isn't our main gig by any means. We're very busy in our real jobs, and this is just fun. And getting to meet people like you. And now I know Avery Carl, and I'm excited. And when I'm down in, you know, in Santa Rosa Beach, I'm gonna have to look you up and we're going to grab a coffee or something.
Sounds good.
This is fun.
Yeah.
What's new for you?
And the diversity of this stuff too. Like, honestly, like everyone has an amazing story. Like John and I weren't born into this space. Like, and how do you find out about, you know, I always think that learning through others' experiences is just immensely valuable. Right.
Totally.
And so, you know, we can hit on, just being 100% honest, there's a lot of stale stuff that goes on. You get a lot of same stories, and it doesn't have to be that way. And, you know, we want to keep growing and keep offering new perspectives and, you know, interviewing more people and have more people sharing their stories.
Yeah. There's definitely
think
a
it's
lot to
fun.
learn out there.
Yeah.
Even when I've had clients of mine on and I'm like, oh yeah, I know what they own. I know what they do, whatever. I'm like, then they'll have this whole story that I had no idea. I just knew they bought a couple houses with us and I thought that's what they were going to talk about. But there's always like a lot more, you know, if you dig deeper.
I love this episode because, you know, now we have this rocker chick that joined our show. She plays bass. She's a real estate investor. She coaches. She does a podcast. She's in 11 markets. It's kick ass.
Yeah, rock star.
We didn't know any of this shit before today. So it's exciting. Hey, Avery, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and link to Shortterm Shop, and we're going to go ahead and link to your Shortterm show in the liner notes and in the episode notes. And if anyone has any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. And please like our podcast. You know the deal. Thanks so much for joining us, Avery. Appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks, Avery.